Hello, free people of Earth, and welcome to This Week in Tyranny, the most hardcore news show on Earth. A weekly program about authoritarianism, government overreach, and global injustice. Live from Chicago, Illinois. If tyranny is not at your doorstep, that's because there is someone in the street keeping it at bay.
We murdered my man like it was okay. For the life he ended, he got suspended with no pay. But if a man would've took the cop life, he would've got life and never again see the street lights.
Welcome. I am your host, Conrad Rogas. Welcome to episode 29 of This Week in Tyranny. Today is Friday, June 23rd, 2023, and this episode will be an interesting one, and it's going to be a fun one. It's about cultivated meat. What's cultivated meat? It could be called cultivated meat, cultured meat, lab-grown meat, artificial, synthetic. It could be called many things, but I'm going to explain the process, okay? So basically, this meat I'm going to talk about, they take a living animal cell, and they have the cell over there on a petri dish, and they put it into a medium. They put it into a solution where they feed the cell all the things it needs, the proteins, the amino acids. So the cell grows as if it is a cell in the animal, okay? And out of that, the cells multiply, and all the way up until the point where you have actual meat, an actual what is chemically identical to animal flesh, right? It's the same thing. It tastes almost the same, but it's not coming from an animal that was actually killed, right? So there's no animal slaughter involved. It's detailed. I'm going to go through it in detail. But just to generalize, this week in tyranny, you get a topic like this. You may expect the government is going to poison us all. They're going to feed us synthetic meat. You may expect that kind of talk coming from me, but I'm actually not coming at it from that angle entirely, because the issue is actually pretty complex. And that actually gives me the opportunity to talk about many different things that are involved in this. But first, let's talk about the people involved, right? Because that's going to tell us a lot. That's going to explain where the tyranny is at here, considering the parties involved. So first, you've got the scientists and the activists working on the technology of this lab-grown, this cultivated meat. That's the first group. Then you got your corporations that want to sell this meat, including existing meat companies who are selling slaughtered meat, who run the slaughterhouses. They're interested in this too, right? So you got them. Then, of course, you got your federal regulatory agencies like the FDA and the USDA, okay? Then you have think tanks and global planning institutes. I'm talking about the social engineering aspect. You've got those people, right? Outside of the scope of federal government. And then you have another group. The most important group is you, the consumer, okay? So now that we have that out of the way, I'll tell you my first reaction when I heard that the FDA approved the sale of cultivated meat to two different companies, because that's what happened. That's how I came across this story. So that I should have began with that. That's actually the news here. The FDA gave the green light to two meat companies, cultivated meat companies. So my first reactions were, this is dystopian, it's anti-human, it's for sure going to be unhealthy, and it's for sure going to be a tool of control and eugenics, right? Now, stay tuned for whether or not that has changed, but that was my first reaction. Then I began my research for this episode by listening to some conferences, some talks of the people involved in this, and I expected to hear liars and bad people. Like when I did, I think it was 10 or 15 episodes ago, I did an episode about the protests in France and the central bankers. So I actually listened to the head of the French central bank and the European central bankers to listen to what they were saying. And when I listened to them, I could tell that they were immoral. They didn't give a damn about anybody. They thought they were God. That's what I expected to hear from these people, right? So I listened to some of the conferences and the workshops from the Good Food Institute. Good Food Institute is a nonprofit directed at advancing cultivated meat and alternative proteins, right? And what I heard is young, driven people who believe in what they are doing, who do it out of good intention. I didn't hear that crookedness that I heard from the central bankers. That's the point I wanted to make. And it surprised me because I think these are solid people, and here's where they're coming from, right? They're coming from, first, they want to reduce the environmental, they want to fix the environmental impact of the meat industry, right? So they want to fix that. And then the standpoint of the care for the treatment of animals. So those things make sense to me, and in my estimation, the people on the ground doing this work to bring it into fruition are good people. And the reason I'm starting off with that is because this is a new area, and I know that public perception of this is negative right now. So they may be watching this. So to anybody who's who's involved in this, I just want to start off by saying I'm not coming at this from a one-dimensional angle. I'm not just going to trash lab-grown meat because it's not from a real cow. I'm thinking about this, first of all, in a very journalistic way, and second of all, in a three-dimensional way, looking at it from all different perspectives, because who we're up against in this slavery system, this tyranny system, they always think about it from all different directions. So that's why I'm beginning with that, because I want to give them their credit, and I want to point out that enough about that. So I'm going to give my scientific response and evaluation of cultivated meat. So in case some actual scientists are watching this, you could hear where I'm coming from, because I do have an idea of the science involved in this, right? And before I do that, I'm going to explain if I have any kind of bias in it, because I have no attachment to meat. I'm not a meat eater. Now, I'm a vegan. I know that most of the people watching this are not. Okay, so I'm just going to real quick explain my take on food, right? The human body is a bioelectrical vehicle, right? Pure water transports the energy for that vehicle. It transports it. The more pure the water is, the better, okay? And the battery that provides that energy is the sun. Now, humans, like all the other animals, are too dense and too complex to use that energy directly, right? So we receive the energy by consuming plants. We eat the plants, which process the sun's energy, so that way we can get the sun's energy, okay? And get it in a form that humans and animals can use directly, okay? Now, but I'm not like one of these vegan religionists, okay? I'm not gonna try to act holy for being vegan. And by the way, I wouldn't even call myself that, because I don't get crazy about, if somebody is giving me a coffee and they put cream in the coffee on the weekends or something, I'm not gonna lose my mind about being 100% hardline, hardcore about the food I take in. What I am 100% hardline about are the principles and the behaviors I do in my daily life. That's what I'm hardline about. About food, if I want to order a pizza once a month, I'm gonna do it, okay? But in my daily habits, I'm vegan, okay? I'm plant-based. Now, I recognize that a lot of meat eaters are healthier than a lot of the vegetarians out here. I'm not, like I said, I'm not religious about this, so I don't have a problem with admitting that, right? Now, the reason is that the meat eaters tend to be healthy in many cases is that the animals that the meat eaters eat, they know what kind of energy they need from what sources, because they're in tune with nature. We aren't, okay? So even though meat eaters get their energy from, I was going to say secondhand source, but it's really a tertiary, it's a third source, okay? The plants are already the secondhand source of energy, but they get their energy from a secondhand source, That's still better than what usually happens to us, vegetarians and vegans, because when we stop eating meat, we have to guess and calculate and do the research on what foods are right for us. And we're not that good at math. Like that meme that goes around, it was a calculated decision, but man, am I bad at math. Okay, that's what people are who try to go vegan. We don't have, the instincts are out of whack, right? Our biological intuition and our cravings are way out of touch. Okay, so that's why these people go into being unhealthy, because it's not that easy, right? Which brings us to cultivated meat. So I like the non-harm to animals angle, right? And I like the environmental impact. I like the idea of reducing the poisoning of the environment through animal farming, right? As well as, the land and resources, and even the metaphysical pollution that is a result of continuing that practice of animal slaughter. There's a metaphysical, oral, etheric pollution that results from that. But I'll try not to get too deep in the occult in this episode, so I'm not even going to go there. I'm just talking about base level stuff, okay? So I oppose animal farming too, because I oppose slavery in all its forms, including the slavery of other species, right? I am free, therefore I will not enslave a lower species. But I have to say, the vitamins and minerals and amino acids and proteins and all of this stuff that are fed to the cells as they reproduce and become meat, they're all processed, and they do not come from nature. So I understand their chemical composition might be identical, but that doesn't mean it's the same thing. Okay, it's not the same thing. It's the same on a biological test. It's the same on a lab screen, but that's not the same. That's not identical. Because life is not just chemical and biological, okay? Life is also electrical and ethereal. It's beyond the physical sciences, is what I mean. So whether it be on a subatomic ethereal level, it does matter that the meat isn't from an animal who actually saw the sun and actually ate the grass. That's critical. Okay, so that's what I have to say. That's the main reason cultivated meat will not have nutritional value. It'll be minimal nutritional value, because even the enzymes and nutrients that are included, because they're already processed coming into the food processing facility, they won't have the enzymes, they won't have the living materials that came from a living plant that can be absorbed by the body. That's another thing that I don't even go into this episode about, because it's a complicated topic. But for it to be bioavailable, they don't have they are not going to have the constituent elements to make these minerals bioavailable to the humans when they consume the cultivated meat. Okay, but that's all I'll say about that for now. I'm going to keep talking about the different groups involved, right? So we talked about the scientists, right? These young trailblazers, they're good people. They're developing a technology that can help, okay? And they're going to do all the heavy lifting. And as soon as the technology is perfected, the big money's going to take over. And these idealist geniuses were going to get pushed out the back door, because food production in the world is all about money. And the work of these people is going to be exploited, and the rug's going to get pulled out from under them by the food processing giants. Okay, why do you think people are unhealthy and sick and overweight? These immoral people in food companies are only in it for the profit motive. Okay, they only care about the money. They add chemicals into the food to make it addictive and fattening. Okay, so that way you become a more frequent customer. And if you don't think this happens, you should ask all the people that overdose on fentanyl, and the people who are selling the fentanyl out here, how the fentanyl gets in all these pills. You don't think chemicals get put in the stuff to make it more addictive? Of course it happens. Currently, it costs $45 a pound to even make this meat, right? So it's a costly process. That's just to produce it. I'm not even talking about selling it. We're not even talking about how much they can actually sell it for. But the reason I say that is because I know people read this story and thought, oh man, they're gonna feed us garbage and sell it cheap, you know? And honestly, that's what I thought when I first see the headline that FDA approves cultivated meat. I thought, oh, they're just gonna feed people garbage, fake garbage, for cheap. And I'm not saying that's not the long-term goal, but this is not cheap right now. Like currently, this is costly, and the people that are doing it are taking a lot of pride and care in doing it the right way. So I just got to give them their props first. But guess what? As soon as these companies start getting the infrastructure in place, which they are, they're going to get the regulations taken care of, which they are, then they're going to cut those production costs down real quick, and they are going to sell it for cheap. And do you know how they're going to do it? They're going to do it by cutting down on the cost of the cell culture medium. What that is basically, I called it a solution before. I think the proper term for it would be a mixture. That's why it's called a medium. It's the fluid, or basically the fluid or the mixture that the cells are grown in, and that's where they get the nutrition from to keep growing. So meaning the stuff they feed the cells. That's how they're going to cut down the costs. The stuff that's supposed to be the actual nutritional content that you eat. How are they going to do this? Well, they're going to do it with the help of a friend, with the help of another party. We got a surprise guest to the party. There's another group involved here, which doesn't seem like there is. So we talked about the young inventors, right? The people working on it. And we talked about the greedy food companies. And now we're going to talk about pharmaceutical companies, because that's who provides the feed for the cells. That's who provides the materials for the cell culture medium. And once the right people get into positions of power in the food companies, and once the right politicians get lobbied, once the right handshakes get made, and once that happens, the pharmaceutical companies are going to drop the price to the floor. And then you are actually going to see this lab-grown meat become cheap, especially if it's in a time of crisis. That's when you're really going to see it. If something like that happened and there's a food crisis and there's a supply shortage, expect these pharmaceutical companies to do a big PR stunt, public relations stunt, and lower their prices like publicly to have this cultured cheap meat in a crisis situation. Look for that. I'm not saying it's going to happen for sure, but it would. That option is definitely on the table for sure. Now, why would the pharmaceutical companies do that and lower their price on purpose? Because they have a big interest in food. And when you give pharmaceutical companies access to your food, you got a big problem, okay? Because in pharmaceutical companies, you have the same kind of immoral people who only care about profit. They only want the money. But what makes it worse is that their profit depends on how much pharmaceuticals they keep selling. And how much pharmaceuticals they keep selling depends on how sick people are. That's the problem, okay? That's what makes it worse. And that's the most unholy union here between food and medicine. And yes, these pharmaceutical companies will intentionally put chemicals into the material for the cell culture medium that will make the people need their blood pressure pills and their SSRIs and their diabetes treatments. Yes, they will. They'll do that, okay? So now we're really getting into the dystopian predictions that many of you were expecting to hear, right? So let's go on to talking about my favorite group of people, the government, specifically federal regulatory agencies. So the FDA, like I said, has approved 2 of these cultivated meat companies, right? The USDA actually said that it will pre-approve them on a case-by-case basis, which basically means that approval is going to depend on how much you'll pay them. Because what a case by pre-approval means is that they're not going to approve them yet. They're not going to generally approve this practice yet. They're going to say, well, we'll pre-approve you, but on an individual basis. So they're going to talk to you, and if they like you, they'll approve you. So setting themselves up to make money. The FDA and USDA have shared jurisdiction on this kind of stuff, so they'll decide who has the authority to regulate based on like if it's 2% chicken, 4% beef, because USDA and FDA, they split based on the different kinds of meat. They have shared jurisdiction, but what they actually have is no jurisdiction, because there's no such thing as ownership of a nation's whole food production. The FDA is a fraud. It claims to have a monopoly on truth about food and medicine. That's why you can't say that this apple will help you treat your heart disease. You'll go to jail for that. They actually made it so that the FDA has a monopoly on truth. They're the arbiters of truth when it comes to food and medicine. The Food and Drug Administration, And that's no different than Joseph Stalin or Hugo Chavez walking around, waving their finger, telling you what you can and you can't eat. That's all it is. And that's not just the FDA. That's all the federal regulatory agencies in the world. You people are mafiosos playing God, especially the people in food, because that's when it's personal, okay? The people who regulate the air filters, I view that a little bit different, okay? The HEPA and even the Environmental Protection Agency, who's becoming dystopian. Of course, they want to control your air, but it's especially disgusting and personal when it's about food. This is about women and children too. It's about it's about something. It's about your human dignity for real. And to all these federal agencies, just in case you never heard, you're not my God and I'm not your slave, and I'll take every chance to prove that. And I'll take that to extreme measures to prove that. It is so degrading and shameful that, if you want to sell vitamin C, you have to put the disclaimer of shame. You have to put, this product will not treat or cure any illness. These statements were not approved by the FDA. Not approved by the FDA. FDA approval is not an indication of safety or effectiveness. It's an indication of cooperation with federal government and big business. That's all that stamp tells you, okay? It says, good boy, you can sell your stuff, okay? You can sell your little supplements. So it's no secret that the FDA is very buddy-buddy with the big pharmaceutical companies and the big food companies. And here's how this works. The companies will take out a politician to a 2-week vacation in Aruba, right? They put him in a mansion with escorts. If they have children, they'll give their child a 6-figure salary job for doing nothing. And what happens a month later? What do you know? Their guy gets appointed by that politician into an administrative position in one of these regulatory agencies. That's how it happens. That's how positions of power were decided in socialist countries. You knew somebody, you had a family member that was in the party, you get the job, you're set. And then that guy that gets appointed makes sure that their competitors don't get approval so easily. And that's just an example of how things work on those levels. That's how they work. But that level is not the highest level. That's not the highest level that runs things. So let's get into the area of that runs things, the area of global planning and think tanks, because that's where the real decisions are made. And as I talked about last week, the profit motive exists to get people who aren't in the know to take the actions that advance the agenda, right? So those politicians, those people in federal agencies, right? Those pharmaceutical company CEOs and staff members, they're in it for the money, but that's not, they're still the low level. They're looked at like us, like the slaves, right? They're low level. The high level doesn't care about money, okay? They are the social engineers, and they do not care about money. They care about directing global movements based on an ideology. So what are those ideologies? What are those agendas? Let's talk about the different agendas at work here with the cultivated meat. So you've got the environmental climate change agenda. What are some of the goals of that? Obviously, they want to reduce carbon, but not to actually make the environment cleaner. They want to reduce carbon to reduce human activity levels, because currently carbon is just the way we manifest in our current state, right? We have combustion engines. Yes, we live on hydrocarbon burning. Okay, this is how we currently get things done. I'm not saying that that's good, but they want to reduce that, not to make the earth cleaner, not to help the animals. They want to reduce that to make us controllable, to reduce our activity. Another thing they want to do with this environmental stuff is they want to create economic strain. They want to make things more expensive because this clean energy stuff, it costs more. It costs more to do things cleanly, obviously. When you're poor and you barely have enough money for food, then you're not gonna have the energy and time and the money to spend to maintain a pristine environment. Okay, obviously. And then the environmental stuff is about control and surveillance. And one way it is about that is, say with cars, right? You got a gas-powered car, old car like mine, you just get a full tank of gas, and you're only controlled by the supply of gas at the gas station, but once you hit the road, you're good. The cat's out of the bag with gas and combustion engines, right? So you can't be surveilled that easily. But as they're getting this electric stuff out, the electric vehicles, right, it requires new technology, and this new technology is going to have technological backdoors, okay, already in the construction of it, that are going to allow these groups to surveil you and track your movement, right? And not just private cars, I'm talking more about like, big logistics, like how freight moves, okay? There's more control with that. And they want to set the precedent for the destruction of private property. That's another thing about the environmentalist stuff. It's not really about the environment. It's just about, okay, you're going to do this new clean way of doing things, but the new way of doing things is going to be centrally controlled. Okay? So that's where the dialectic is. It's not about unsustainable energy versus sustainable energy. It's about private property and autonomy of the resources you have, as opposed to centrally controlled so-called clean resources and clean sustainable mechanisms. On to the next agenda, the plant-based agenda. And yes, there is a plant-based agenda. So, and this is coming from me, who does eat plant-based. Okay, so this is true. They are trying to get the idea out there to get people to eat less meat. I'm not going to deny that. There is like a anti-meat agenda out here. And why is that happening? One reason is to weaken the average person. Because, not because eating plant-based makes you weak. I'm a good example of that. I'm not weaker than I was. I'm stronger than I was. But the average person will get weakened because it takes planning, it takes supplementing, and it takes dedication to eat plant-based. It might even take a little bit of luck. Some people get sick and then that's it. Maybe, just like an addict, maybe eating meat for generations, genetically and epigenetically have, modified their body to incorporate the meat diet into their homeostasis and functioning to the point that they cannot switch over so easily, and they may not be able to transition, so they will be weaker. They may not be healthier by eating vegan. Some people. So they do want to weaken the average person, make them more controllable. Then they want to sell more processed food. Now, I don't eat processed food. I eat mostly raw fruits and vegetables, mostly. So almost nothing I eat is processed. But a lot of this plant-based stuff is processed. It's hard to eat plant-based and not processed. These new fake, real meat, like real dairy, almost dairy. I can't believe it's not dairy. This stuff is super processed. Okay, it's like between a rock and a hard place, pick your poison. You want super processed chemicals, or you want dead animal slaughtered flesh? It's not the way to go either way. And another thing that the plant-based agenda is supposed to do is economic and societal, but economic mostly, disempowerment of local farmers. These local farmers constitute a huge part of our society. Many people like me who are in cities, we don't think about how important these people are, and we don't think about how much they value freedom. A lot of them are not brainwashed like the guys, like most of the people here in Chicago and the major cities. These people, they spend time with nature. The government, it's too difficult for them to impose their hard slavery on them like they do with us here, right? So they don't pay $150 for their vehicle license plate sticker. They might pay like $30. So these are people we need on our side, and an unfortunate side effect of this plant-based agenda is going to be that these people cannot make a living, and they'll have to move into the cities, and they're going to get integrated into the Babylonian monolith that is modern society. Last agenda, the genetic and biological tampering agenda, what has also been called the transhumanism agenda. So why do they do this? They want to undermine the free will by feeding people synthetic materials. You put chemicals and fake stuff into your body, it's actually going to undermine your free will. Metaphysically it does this, and physically. Also, they want to lower your inhibitions of artificial materials and nanotechnology in the body. So they want to get you more comfortable with things coming from a laboratory, because that's going to be like the gateway to, okay, maybe I could get a chip injected into my hand or something like that, okay? And then they want to distance humanity from nature to make us more docile. That goes along with free will. They want to make us more easy to control. When we get separated from nature, we get weaker then, because that's where our energy comes from. It comes from those plants, not just eating them, but feeling them, touching them, okay? I'm not a flowery hippie guy. I'm not like somebody who goes to meditate in the forest. I'm a street dude. I'm a real dude. But you better believe that nature makes us stronger, right? Hiking makes you strong, going to the beach. This stuff will connect you to the life force and actually maybe make you want to fight for your freedom and rights and, the welfare of your children. But let's move on. So I listened to some of these conferences of the people at the Good Food Institute. I thought, okay, these are real normal people with good intentions. Cool. Not what I was expecting. And then I heard a talk by Max Elder, a relatively young man, older than me, who is the research director for the Institute for the Future. That's a think tank. That's a think tank. I heard him for a few minutes, and I thought to myself, okay, now this is an occultist. I'm like, finally, what I was expecting, okay? I looked him up later. Here's a brief bio, right? He has led work around the world with food companies like Barilla, Hershey's, and Campbell's, major foundations like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and innovative technology companies like Google and Intel, big tech. He sits on the advisory boards of Foodshot Global and Food Systems for the Future. Max has written for and been quoted in the New York Times, The Guardian, NPR, Quartz, Fast Company, and many others. He has published in dozens of peer-reviewed journals and books. His research is taught at universities around the world, including Harvard Law and Oxford University, and he speaks globally on topics related to food systems and ethics. So that should tell you what kind of people he's involved in. But I didn't even have to look that up. I knew. I'm telling you, like after the first 2 minutes of him talking, I knew, and I was right, because he spoke to the people about imagery, right, and imagination, and then he explained the etymology of the word, that the word imagination comes from image. He talked about the images, how to present the idea of cultivated meat to people. He talked about how to make it palatable for the masses. So he talked about how it would look like to get that idea through to a mother feeding her child, okay? So in other words, he's talking about how to utilize emotional influence to get the people attached to their product, okay? So it was titled In Our Own Image, which is one of the reasons I clicked on it, because I'm like, oh, that's kind of interesting that such a blatant biblical reference would be the title, considering that like playing God is one of the first things that is like one of the criticisms of this synthetic or lab grown. I don't want to say synthetic. It's not synthetic. It's real, but it's lab grown cultivated meat. One of the first thing a person like me thinks is like, oh, they're playing God, and then he has a talk called "In Our Own Image," which is what Elohim says, "Let us make man in our own image" in Genesis, first chapter. So, but he talked about the word imagination, meaning image, and he talked about the different images they can use to represent cultured meat. Specifically on Google Images, he brought up Google Images as like a tool of mass influence, a very important tool of how to sway public opinion. What he stopped short of telling them is that, yeah, the word imagination comes from the word image, but the word image actually comes from the Latin magi, meaning magician. That's the same root word as magic, okay, magical, magician. And that goes all the way back to the ancient language, like what they call the ancient Proto-Indo-European language. And the root word is something like magician, the M-G, magician, M-E-G, M-A-G, magi. And that word in the ancient Proto-Indo-European meant to be able to, it meant power, and it meant sorcerer. A sorcerer is a dark magician. And the definition of sorcery is influencing change to occur in accordance with the will of the practitioner. So sorcery is not like Harry Potter sorcery, okay? Influencing people like in a talk like this, like by creating images to sway global opinion, that's sorcery. That's magic is doing that for a light purpose, for a purpose of beneficence and well-being of the divine will, and sorcery is doing that to the practitioner's will. Okay, and that's what the dark occultists do. They influence the minds of everyone on earth, and they rule without a tank or a gun. They rule with their ideas and influence. That's what they do. So real quick, here are some of the things he said, right? He said we have to be clear about the goal and flexible about the path to get there. And I made sure to write that down when I was listening to it, because that is like a big modus operandi for the occultists, because they adhere to this on all levels. Like the same thing with totalitarian control. They don't care if the Nazis were successful in doing it. They weren't. So then we had communism in Poland for like 40 years, right? So the goal is what matters to them. They only care about this. They only care about the thing they want. How they get there, they do not care. If you want to keep voting Republican and Donald Trump could get 10 consecutive terms, they're still going to get their slavery. That's how it works. They don't care which way they go to get it. They see the goal and they focus on the goal, and they're going to get it. Okay. He also talked about forcing the future to change through our vision. There was a lot of talk about forcing and using force. He's being very clear about this. He's talking about forcing the people to change. Okay. Then he talked about this cultured meat, this cultivated meat, to make it be engaging and playful. Like for kids, is food supposed to be engaging and playful? When people talk, you could just listen to them, and that should jump on the page. It jumps off the page. But you got somebody that knows how to talk, and people are just gonna buy it. Like, oh yeah, we'll make it engaging and playful. It'll be fun. Why should food be engaging and playful? It's filling your gas tank at the gas station. It's just energy. Then he commended. He complimented some of the alternative meat entrepreneurs for targeting middle and high schoolers. This is a great thing to him. So like Roddy Hawkins, the creator of Lunchables, Lunchables, the company that basically fed the last generation, like my generation, with these plastic, barely edible, packs of food for directed at school children. He's a founder of one of these alternative meat companies called Improved Nature. So you see, these food companies are getting in on while the getting's good. Okay, they're getting in on this cultivated meat business. Okay, early, and they're bringing children into it. And then he said, any image of the future should at first seem ridiculous. And I thought, absolutely, I see what he's getting at, because they're about pushing the boundaries. And what I thought of is that when I tell people about a world without, government control, that seems ridiculous to them. And that's the same thing. I had to have that image, the people teaching natural law have to have that image that people don't think this is possible, but it is. Now, are we going to get our image to become the future, or are they going to? Oh no, this stuff that Max Elder said is very good advice. I have a lot of respect for the way these people's mind works, okay? The problem is their vision is our slavery. So that's all it is. But we could definitely learn a lot from them. And if you want to see a dark occultist, like, I know people talk about the controllers of the world and no one knows what they look like, what they talk like. If you want to see a dark occultist, go watch In Our Own Image by Max Elder on YouTube. Then you'll see. But the dark occultists ultimately aren't even the big bad sorcerer running the world. They don't control anything really. The top level main controller of this reality is you, the consumer. You decide what's going to be in the meat. You decide what you're going to accept as food. You decide the level of transparency that these companies are going to be forced to adhere to, because you can decide that. You can demand that with your voice. You could demand all of it. You can actually take down the FDA's monopoly on food and medicine by how? Becoming knowledgeable and outspoken about what you know to be true about health, what you know to be the truth about food and medicine, right? You're not a victim of what they feed you. You control what they feed you, because you don't have to accept any of it. You don't have to accept any of this food they put out. And you can, and I know the alternative is expensive. The other day I spent $400 at Whole Foods and got pretty upset about that slightly. You can lower the prices of organic food. How? By refusing to pay income tax. You refuse to pay income tax, I bet that's going to shake up the FDA regulations and the price gouging at Whole Foods real quick. None of these things are as easy as they sound, obviously. They require many people. They require coordination. They require dedication and action, willpower. But I'm going to borrow a concept from our friend Max. Most of all, what it requires is your imagination. The picture, the image of a world where your dignity as a human being is respected. That has to occur in your mind first, okay? But I could see that picture of that world very clearly, and here's what it is. It's anarchy under natural law. That's This Week in Tyranny. Thank you very much, and I'll see you next week on This Week in Tyranny.